Perspective for Parents. It's good to see all of you today. We have a special guest. Her name is Mary Johnson. And some of you may know, and some of you may not know, Mary Johnson is a member of our church and also one of the first cases of COVID-19 in Washington County. And so, Mary, we are just absolutely honored and overjoyed that you could be with us today. And I'm just going to turn it over to you. Mary, if you would just share what your experiences were like. And obviously now with the bookcase behind you, you're at home. So tell us about what's happened.
Oh, I am at home. And I think I was, when I was sick, I felt like I was safe, well taken care of. I wasn't at all anxious while the rest of you were out in the outer world trying to figure this thing out. Now I get to join you as we try to figure this thing out. So my husband calls it my COVID vacation, and we joke about that. But when I was released from the hospital, I remember driving through town, and there were a lot of cars in the road, a lot of cars in the parking lot. And what I wanted to do so bad was have a sunroof in our car so that I could stand up in our car while my husband drove and yell out to people, waving my bony arms around my masked face and say, people, go home. This is real. And now that it's not going away. And in fact, it's gotten worse for us in Oregon and all over the United States and world. But it's easy to forget. Even with me, who was so sick, it's so easy to forget and want to go back to normal. So thank you for a chance to stand up through my pretend sunroof and tell people this is real. We have to keep paying attention to it. I just thought I had allergies in middle of March because the trees were blooming and a little bit of sniffles and all. So no big deal. I didn't have a temperature, didn't feel like I had trouble catching my breath or anything. But one time when I was walking, I got through the middle of my walk and thought, I can't do this. Of course, I had to finish my walk. I had to get home. But that was when it really hit me. I'm not doing so well. And then at home, I was just tired. I needed to eat, but I couldn't fix myself something to eat. All I wanted to do was just curl up. Finally, my husband stepped forward and we filled out the COVID-19 form for our healthcare provider and online. And they told us to come into the emergency room. And this was Kaiser West Side, and they were wonderful. Thank you, Lord, for the group of people there who took care of us. But they took us into the emergency room. My husband and I sat in a room with 3 caregivers, and the doctor was right in my face. Nobody used the C word. This was March 14th. It was almost like it was down from above. We're not going to talk about this. We're going to figure it out, but we're not talking about it. And even though I said I could have that new virus, nobody used that word. I got a flu test. I was an x-ray. I was diagnosed with pneumonia, given antibiotics, and sent home. I didn't get better. I got worse. And by Thursday, the 19th, my husband pulled his strings again through email and the telephone, and the hospital said, come back in. So we drove back to the emergency room. It was a whole different place. This time they had their tent out in the parking lot. They would not let you come into the hospital. They would not let my husband come in with me. 2 people came out with a wheelchair and took me in. But my dear husband, this is something I'll never forget. He said, wait. And they turned around and he said, he planted his feet in the middle of the asphalt and he said, you had better keep her. I am not taking her back home. I can't take care of her anymore. You have to let her in. And it was just amazing for him to reach out like that to them. And they said, don't worry, we'll take care of her. They wheeled me in there and into a room in the emergency room. They took x-rays through the window. They didn't know, they were trying to figure out what was going on. And I knew I was one of the first there. So I really believe that it was my job to say, okay, use me, use what you learn about this disease from me to help us figure this out. So I got tested finally, and I thought, ooh, maybe I could sell my tests because they're not much fun at all. Then I got tested several times for that, but it took 3 days for them to call me positive. I was called a person under investigation, a PUV, and it was very mysterious. Different people wore different types of masks. Some people didn't wear masks at all. I was in several different rooms at first until I was finally moved to my last room, which was, I was in intensive care the whole time, but I was moved to the last room where they were building the COVID ward around us. Later, I found out I was right next door to the man who was the first person from Washington County. He's a great person. At the moment, I can't think of his name, but he works at one of the schools in Lake Oswego. And he was surrounded by students who loved him so much. Anyway, he and I think may have been the first two. I know we were in the first 5 there. And they wouldn't tell me more about numbers after that because they weren't supposed to talk about it. But everyone was trying to figure out what kind of gear to wear. They were trying different masks, trying different oxygen things on me. And I think I felt, you know, the Narnia stories, Aslan. And there's a part where Lucy knows, she feels this wind blowing and she knows that it's Aslan must be there. Well, I felt Aslan's breath on my cheek. So once again, I felt calm. I felt content. I wasn't anxious. I knew it was my job to trust myself and to love my nurses because they were scared. They didn't know what was going on. One nurse told me, I would look them in their eye and I would say, "How are you?" And they would share with me. And one nurse, the first time I met him, he said, "I feel the safest here than any place else in the hospital because here I know I'm covered, I'm prepared, we've done all these preparations, and I'm safe here. In the rest of the hospital, I don't know who has COVID-19. I don't know if I can take it home to my children." He said, "So for my job, I feel safe." So that was a story I'll always remember. If I talk too much, you'll be sure to slow me down or stop me.
You're doing great, Mary.
Another nurse told me toward the end of my stay, "You are very, very, very lucky to be walking out of here alive." And I don't think I realized how sick I was, you know, but that will always stick with me too.
Mary, would you let us know how long you were in the hospital?
I was on oxygen and intensive care for 13 days. 13, and I began to understand what people who are really sick, what it's like, because I'd never been really sick before. But friends who've gone through chemotherapy and all, I understood. They had me on chloroquine. At that time, they were looking at hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine as 2 possible treatments. And now they aren't using either of those. But they tried chloroquine on me. And I had horrible nausea and vertigo, and that was pretty rough to go through. And it made me think, this must be what those going through chemotherapy have to go through. So I gained understanding through those experiences.
Mary, as you were talking, I need to look this verse up because it's Philippians 4. It says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with Thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And so I just, as you were talking and sharing about how frightening the hospital and the ICU must have been, just with the uncertainty and the unknown, but you had that the breath of Aslan, the breath of Jesus, surround you and give you that peace. So I'm just amazed and wanting to reflect on that in spite of an opportunity of high anxiety, God had given you a sense of stability, grounded you.
You said that well. That's exactly what it was like. And I think a lot of people, my husband and I didn't think we had a support group, but the choir at church gathered around us. If we have time at the end, ask me about the fence that God blew down, because that's another group that circled around us. It was quite amazing, the people that circled around us. And then I don't do much with Facebook, but I told my sister I was sick and she put it on Facebook. So there were people all over the country through her Facebook who were praying for me. So all of that was happening. And I know, that's why I could savor my solitude. And that's why I could love those nurses who needed to be taken care of so much right then, because I was okay. I was being taken care of.
Mary, what would you say to families right now? So we are entering the first week of July, and people who tune in to listen to the show, they're parents, Lake Grove Kids parents, and some are parents, some are grandparents. What would you say to them?
Say, what a good time to have this happen. It's summertime. We can be outside, and children can be outside, and adolescents can be outside, and adults can be outside. We can safe distance walk. You can go to the beach with your family where beaches are open. So I am really thankful that this is happening for us right now. It may be lasting a very long time. And if we can build our habits now, it will be easier when we're not as able to be outside. But I feel much safer outside. I wear a mask whenever I go someplace, and I don't go that many places, but I don't wear a mask when I walk. And I safe distance walk with a couple of friends, and we do the 6 feet. Some people who are working with children are doing the airplane arms for safe distancing. So we do our airplane arms and safe distance walk. And in the fresh air, exercise and fresh air is so important anyway, and being out in nature. So I'm so grateful that this is happening to us now, and we can be outside as we practice these strategies. Things like, can I read you something?
Sure.
This is from a book called Breath of the Whale. I don't know if you've read it. It came out last year, but I just happened back on something that I had marked on it. And it's talking about personal space and safe distancing. Americans prefer a personal space of at least 1 to 4 feet between us and our friends and family, and 4 to 12 feet between us and strangers in social spaces. Now that was written way before we were talking about social distancing. Naturally, this personal space varies by culture, but imagine being a blue whale at 100 feet long, swimming in the ocean with poor visibility and sound rather than sight as your primary means of locating those around you. From our human point of view, we consider whales to be together only if they're close physically. But perhaps to a whale, several hundred yards or even miles between animals is considered hanging out with friends. We get to figure out new ways and different ways of community and of being together. So that was just fun for me to find and think about right now.
Well, and especially if we're talking about children, because children often think of things in terms of the animal kingdom and picturing a whale, thinking that you're close to someone, being miles apart. helps us remember that that 6 feet, those airplane arms are not quite as much as what that whale is experiencing.
And so, Mary, tell us about the fence, because that was a hook. Now I'm interested. What happened with the blown down fence?
Well, it was that Sunday in March was windy anyway. In fact, now this is kind of like a prologue. It doesn't have to do with the story, but it's important to me. I walked between 2 of the church services at church down to the lake and back. And I was walking and the wind was blowing, and right on the corner of Reese and the road that's closest down to the lake on that side of the church.
Right.
Yes. I was walking and 2 huge branches fell down right in front of me that Sunday. A couple of neighbors came out and some passersby came out, and we pulled them to the side, and a neighbor was going to call the city to have them removed. And I told somebody at church they might want to check the tree to make sure it was safe. But I looked up and realized they were big branches that had come down from way up on the top. So it was really windy. We got home that Sunday after church, and in the back of our house, we looked out the backyard, and our back fence had blown down. Just as we discovered that, a knock on the door, and our neighbor had walked all the way around the block to say, "Did you see our fences down? What shall we do?" And so we made a plan, how we were going to build it back together, and she left. Well, a week and a half or so later, she called to tell Craig that she'd talked to someone to rebuild the fence. And Craig was just beginning his self-quarantine and didn't really know what to do. And I was in the hospital and he couldn't do anything for me.
Right.
And she gathered neighbors, at least 50 people from our backyard, her neighbors that she knows. Most of the neighbors I know are in my front neighbors. I didn't know any of my back neighbors. They ended up bringing food for Craig, shopping for Craig, encouraging Craig, writing notes to Craig, making a video for me, which I ended up showing to the doctors. And the doctors would visit the hospital room. They would wheel in a computer screen because they would have their team, instead of doing rounds so they would all be exposed, they would do it by computer and come in there. I showed it to them and all the doctors applauded. It was children and adults who were just reaching out to me, and all strangers. And that was just amazing. That wouldn't have happened if that fence hadn't blown down. So, and on Easter morning then, I was back home. I look outside and there's 3 people that came up and stood on the broken down part of the fence. And they held up a sign that said Happy Easter, and they sang Amazing Grace.
Oh,
so that's the story of the fence that God blew down.
Oh, what a story of community, Mary, that people young and old, intergenerations come together as encouragement, and that comes from the Lord.
It does.
That is the Lord's provision for us.
And that idea of wind and Aslan's breath, and my lungs being, I felt like they were thin and black and crispy, like crispy potato chips. That paradox of breathing is so important to me to think about too, is that God's breath was much stronger and he would breathe for me.
And God, who in Genesis breathed life into all of us, that it's his breath that fills us. That's a great reminder.
Thank you for letting me tell my story and for giving time for the fence story.
Well, thank you, Mary. I am just so, again, amazed, and maybe I'm having trouble finding the right words, but thank you for reminding us that we have to continue to stay safe and to stay healthy. Also to take opportunities. We do need to go outside. We need to, for our mental health and exercise, that's still important, but to do that in a way that is safe.
And when you're around people, wear a mask.
us, and that the disease is real, but even in the midst of being in the pit, um, the Lord is with us and
Yes.
surrounding us with community of love and encouragement. And that community essentially is the Lord's hands and feet. So thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for being a guest with us with Perspectives Parents.
Thank you.
We'll see you all next time.
See you next time.
Bye.